How bright is the future for the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. And of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And welcome in. This is an episode of Locked On Ravens After Dark. For those who aren't in the Baltimore area, the Maryland area, there was a huge storm yesterday, and it knocked the power out here. Knocked a lot of power out. I think the stat was over 100,000 people don't have power right now. Some crazy numbers, some really big damage across the state. So, here there's no power. There's very limited power, I'd say. So I had to kind of figure stuff out. So we have returned to the virtual background era. This is something we did back in March a little bit for about a week, and now power. There's no power, so we got to go back to it. The lighting is just a little bit weird without it, so it kind of adds to it. And we'll be rocking with it. So that's why, in case you see like my ear disappearing or something pops up behind me in the background a little bit, that's why. So if you're listening in audio form, you want to come over and see what I'm talking about. It's the whole time. So I'm hoping that the video is okay, the audio is okay, and again, I hope everyone's safe from the storm for those who are in the Maryland, Baltimore area. It is a crazy time right now, but no power, limited power is not going to stop us from putting out content here today. I had a guest lined up. We were going to do a really fun episode for today, but I had to figure stuff out once the power went out. So we'll try to get to that in the next week or so. But I did say the mailbag was going to be on Thursday. We're going to continue and do the mailbag on Thursday. Today, I want to talk a bit about the Ravens and their future and just really how bright it is, because I think that with the amount of veteran talent the Ravens have, there is also a surplus of young talent. I think the Ravens have done a good job balancing out their veteran talent and their young talent. So in the second segment, we'll talk about the offensive future. In the third segment, we'll talk about the defensive future. This will be more of a talent perspective instead of salary cap. We will talk about the salary cap as well, where money will be going into expiring contracts, etc. So it'll be a whole conversation. Then in the first segment, I do want to talk about where the Ravens were last year versus where they are this year in terms of their injured position. So, for example, what the Ravens had last year when J.K. Dobbins went down versus what they have this year in the event that Dobbins has to miss some games. So, talking about some depth there. So, jam-packed episode today, even with the power outage. But before we talk about that, be sure to follow us on YouTube. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It does help out a ton here. And also, we're looking for 3,000 subscribers next. We've achieved 1,000 subscribers, 2,000 subscribers. I'm excited to hit that 3,000 sub goal. So thank you to everybody who has subscribed already. And if you haven't, we put out Daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So that's analysis, news, opinions, anything you can get on the Ravens. So be sure to subscribe and again, like the video. Also in audio form, thank you so much for tuning in audio form. I know you can't see the background in audio form, but whether you're at work or you're driving home from work or driving to work, thank you so much for tuning in, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk about some of the Ravens' depth that they have at positions that were hit hard by injuries last year. Now, I'm not going to go too much into, I guess we can talk about quarterback first with Lamar Jackson, but Jackson seems 100% healed from that bone bruise. Same depth pretty much. They brought in Josh Johnson at the end of last year. They have Tyler Huntley at quarterback now who's competing for a spot. It's Brett Hundley, it's Anthony Brown, but Huntley is still there. So I think Tyler Huntley obviously is there if Lamar Jackson were to go down. And we talked yesterday about how Lamar Jackson, in my eyes, more than a top 10 quarterback, but a top 10 most valuable player, the most valuable player in this league in terms of just what he means to the team. So they have that there. But I want to talk more about like the running back position and a couple of those others, because I think what you have is last year when the Ravens lose J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, there was not a single carry, yard, touchdown, whatever you want to call it, from the running back position that they had in 2020. All three of those guys went down. Mark Ingram was in Houston at the time, obviously got traded to New Orleans. But the Ravens had to go out and sign 3 veterans. So they signed Le'Veon Bell, they signed Devonta Freeman, They signed Latavius Murray as well. They had Tyson Williams there too, but it wasn't a group that inspired a ton of confidence. Now, each of them had their moments, some more than others. But this year, I feel a lot more confident about their depth because let's say both Dobbins and Edwards have to miss time. In that event, you have Tyler Beatty, who's coming in fresh legs, sixth round rookie, very productive at Missouri. You have Mike Davis, who has been a quality backup option for a while, also has some starting experience as well. So you have a young guy, you have a veteran, and you also have depth behind those guys. So if the Ravens wanted to keep around Justice Hill in that event, if they wanted to keep around a guy like Nate McCrary or Ricky Person, they have those options. So instead of signing three guys who, again, they have to get up to speed with the offense. They have to figure out, oh, I'm supposed to be here at this time and I have to do this when and this here. They don't have to do that, the guys this year, because they will be in the system. They will be learning those things as they go. Whereas literally these guys, Le'Veon Bell and Devonta Freeman, Latavius Murray, were all signed like 10 days before the season started, less than that. So I am much more confident in their depth based off of if Dobbins or Edwards has to miss some time. And of course, they're going to be better prepared because they can see it coming. They didn't really see those injuries coming last year. But I applaud Eric DeCosta and what he was able to do at that position. Same thing on the offensive line, right? Ronnie Stanley. Everybody thought he was going to be back. Well, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people expected, full strength, week one, here we come. This is what it's going to be. It's going to be great. And then he plays the game, doesn't look like himself, opts for the second ankle surgery after getting shut down. And then the Ravens are stuck in a situation where they have to move Alejandro Villanueva back over to the left side after already transitioning him over to right. And then you have Patrick McCary, who, to his credit, played pretty well at right tackle, but injuries just caught up with him later in the year. Tyree Phillips has to come in. Again, as I've said time and time again, he's not a tackle. He's a guard to me. So this year, what did the Ravens do? Well, they have Juwan James coming back from an injury. They have Morgan Moses, who they signed. They have Daniel Falele, who they ended up drafting. And they also have McCary, who can now slide over and play some tackle if they need him to, if Tyler Linderbaum is the center there. So I feel much more confident in their tackle depth. The Ravens obviously prioritized bringing in protection for Lamar Jackson, and credit to them. That's what they should have done, and I'm glad that they did it. So I think for the Ravens and what they have to offer Lamar Jackson in terms of tackle protection, I don't think we're going to see nearly as much flushing out of the pocket for Lamar Jackson, him having to scramble around, do a lot of stuff. He'll do that still as part of his game, and he's really good at it. But he can also, I think, he'll have more time to stand in the pocket, deliver those balls that we saw him do for a lot of the beginning of the year when the offensive line wasn't incomplete shambles. I don't know how to say it otherwise. It was really the only two consistent positions on the line last year were center with Bradley Bozeman and right guard with Kevin Zeitler. Other than that, you were looking at a lot of shuffling, some subpar play, and it impacted the whole offense. So, yeah, that's a position tackle I feel much more confident in as well. We can briefly talk about tight end for Nick Boyle. I mean, Boyle was very in and out during 2021. Had some games he played, most of the time he didn't play, and it just seemed like he wasn't fully back. But he looks like a different person now, and I'm really excited to see him back in this offense. But again, in the event Boyle has to miss some time, the Ravens now have drafted Charlie Kolar, Isaiah Likely. Obviously, Mark Andrews is there. You can't forget Mark Andrews. But if they need to maybe try to sneak a Josh Oliver onto the practice squad, they have a couple other guys they could potentially add as well. I think they're much more suited at that position because of just what they have. So that's another position I'm very excited about. Outside linebacker's weird because they didn't really have a ton of injuries last year. It was week 18. Bowser suffered that injury. We've talked about outside linebacker a lot before, and plus Ajabo has the injury too. Houston, Oweh, Hayes, those are the three for now if Ajabo and Bowser can't come back. But it's a weirder position because, again, we didn't really see injuries until the end of the year there. There were a couple, like Adafe Oweh did suffer an injury. He missed a couple games, but it's one. The defensive line also didn't have a ton. I mean, Derek Wolfe, but I think they're much more prepared with Calais Campbell coming back and Travis Jones, and they brought in Michael Pierce and Brent Urban and just Metabike, Bryce Washington. So I'm content there. Inside linebacker, again, didn't really see injuries at that position. It was really Malik Harrison did suffer, really unfortunate events for him. But other than that, Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes stayed pretty healthy. So I think now what you're looking at is the cornerback position, where Marcus Peters goes down before the year. Marlon Humphrey goes down towards the end of the season. They have other guys like Tavon Young actually was pretty healthy considering what he went through earlier in his career, but Anthony Averett misses some time as well. I am much more confident in their cornerback depth. Like Marlon Humphrey seems 100%. Doesn't seem like that's going to be an issue. But if Peters has to go on the PUP list and miss some time, you have Kyle Fuller in there now as a solid veteran option. Still has to bounce back and prove it, but I think he can do that. You're also looking at Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams. You can have Brandon Stevens play some positions there, or Darius Washington as well. So yeah, good corner depth, safety depth as well. Deshaun Elliott goes down. They have to kind of cycle in some guys. Brandon Stevens plays there. You're looking at now Kyle Hamilton coming in, Marcus Williams, Tony Jefferson coming back, Geno Stone, obviously Chuck Clark still there as well. That position has a lot of new faces in it, but I'm very excited for it. So compared to last year, I'm much more confident this year in terms of if a guy misses time, if a guy goes down, the Ravens have the depth to, I guess, just wait it out until that guy comes back, or just continue on if that guy has to miss a significant amount of time, like the season, let's say. I hope there aren't any injuries like that this season. Football's a game where that can happen on any play, but I still think that the Ravens did a good job building up their depth and really seeing ahead. We'll talk about the Ravens' future, beyond this year in the second and third segments, but I think the Ravens were looking ahead this year and saying, well, if J.K. Dobbins has to miss some time, if Marcus Peters has to miss some time, et cetera, they have the depth behind those guys, and that is something I think will benefit them, could even result in a couple more wins if that is the case, and they have to rely on that talent before their other talent gets back. But we still have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. Still to come, we're going to be diving into next segment, the offensive future of this team and how bright or even not bright it is. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Dave. And there's a lot of times where sometimes you want to change the past, and hindsight is 2020. But what if you can get a little bit of help from your future self? Maybe you'd have to borrow a little cash, but now you actually can do that with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out with any hangups. There's no interest and no credit card check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch, need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. The future self will thank you. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Locked On Ravens After Dark. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like this video, tune in audio form, follow along the whole 9 yards. And yeah, we're going to continue on here. Virtual background era is still alive, and we're going to talk about what the Ravens could be looking at in their future era. Now, a lot of people are focused on this season, myself included. I'm really excited for it, but the Ravens, really any NFL organization, has to look ahead. They have to look ahead, salary cap situation. What are the contracts looking like? Future draft picks, looking at young talent as well compared to veteran talent. There is really a lot that goes into this kind of stuff. And I think when looking at a team like the Ravens, they do such a good job. And we've talked about it before. Their draft strategy in particular is stacking depth on depth, so that, let's say a veteran guy is on the way out, maybe not performing up to expectations. They have a guy, usually, not all the time, but sometimes, waiting in the wings to take over that, and there is either no drop off or an improvement in production. And I think, like, one of the examples I'll use is the J.K. Dobbins pick. Now, Mark Ingram coming off a 15 touchdown season in 2019. Obviously, that was Lamar Jackson's MVP season, unanimous MVP season. But the Ravens decided to end up just in the nick of time going with a running back in the second round. Now, it seemed like Dobbins was going to get taken a couple picks after that. So it was literally just in the nick of time that they were able to draft him, because it seemed like he wouldn't have been there. The Ravens took him at 55. I don't think he would have been there at 60. I think that I know the Dolphins were heavily linked to him. I know a lot of people in Pittsburgh wanted him. So the Ravens got their guy in J.K. Dobbins, but people were talking about why wouldn't they take Denzel Mims? Denzel Mims, a wide receiver out of Baylor, pretty high regarded. Saw some mocks who had him in the first round. The Ravens could have definitely taken a wide receiver then. They decided to go with the running back. And what happened? Mark Ingram definitely declined in play and production, was a healthy scratch for a lot of the games towards the back half of the season. J.K. Dobbins in 2020 ended up bursting onto the scene after only having 25 carries in 6 games. Just unbelievable. So the Ravens, they took J.K. Dobbins knowing they had Mark Ingram, knowing they had Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. They were looking ahead there. They've done it a lot of times. I mean, even the Kyle Hamilton pick, you can argue, it's not necessarily a veteran on the way out, but I mean, the Ravens now have a future stud, in my opinion, at safety and Kyle Hamilton there. So if and when Chuck Clark ends up leaving, or if they need somebody else at safety, they're not going to necessarily need to absolutely prioritize the position because they have a Kyle Hamilton there. We'll talk about Kyle Hamilton in the final segment. I want to focus on offense here. So a lot of the future of the offense does hinge on Lamar Jackson, and that it's big. He's 25 years old, going to hopefully be their franchise quarterback for a really long time. But a lot of what goes into this future conversation outside of draft capital, because the Ravens aren't a team that trades a lot of their draft capital. They still have a lot of their picks moving forward here. What comes into it here is the contract extension that hopefully will be signed between the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. It's going to eat up a lot of cap, eat up a lot of yearly cap. We're looking 40 plus million, 45, 50 plus million per season. It's a lot to invest in one player. Now, Lamar Jackson certainly has earned that money. Don't get me wrong. He's a player the Ravens absolutely should pay. But that takes away from some of the guys who can sign in free agency to second contracts, third contracts. So the Ravens already have Ronnie Stanley signed to almost an $100 million contract. Mark Andrews signed a big extension. They're going to have to look at other extensions as well for other guys. But I do feel like it's going to take more away from the defense, I'd say, like the spending on the defensive side of the ball. And we'll get into that in the final segment. But in terms of actual talent, I mean, we can look here. Lamar Jackson, I did talk about, was 25. They have a lot of young players too. Rashad Bateman entering his second season, only 22 years old. You have running backs such as Tyler Beatty, who's 22. He's a rookie this year, obviously. I mean, some of the other guys are on the, I guess you could call it older, like J.K. Dobbins going into a second season is 23. And obviously birthdays matter here. So some guys have obviously turned 23 recently. Other guys are turning 23 and who knows. But you have J.K. Dobbins, who's 23. Gus Edwards, who feels like a while since Gus Edwards has come in the league, hasn't it? It feels like he's a guy that like has just been around for a while, but he's only 27. Like, I guess he's kind of like in his prime almost right now, but he's 27. Really, the oldest guy in the running back room right now is Mike Davis, who some people might think he's 30. He's actually only 29. So that's a really good thing for this team, that they have so much talented depth at running back, and they can afford to maybe, like, they signed Gus Edwards with that extension, and I think that was a great extension for them. Maybe Dobbins commands a bit more, but the running back market is so interesting in terms of just what guys get paid what. And with the Ravens having definitely a split, so Dobbins and Edwards will probably split with some Tyler Beatty in there, potentially Mike Davis, assuming everybody's healthy. What's the contract for Dobbins going to look like, right? Is it going to be a huge 4-year, $50 million deal, or is it going to be more in the, hey, we'll give you 3 for 25 or 3 for 27 and then do that? So the Ravens will have to decide there on Dobbins when and if time comes for them to sign him to an extension. Who knows what that's going to look like. Wide receiver wise, again, a lot of young talent. The Ravens didn't bring in a veteran option, or at least at the time of this recording, they haven't. Rashad Bateman, I talked about, 22. Devin Duvernay, 24. James Prochet, 25. Tylan Wallace, 23. They have young studs there. Now, extensions are going to happen potentially with these guys, so maybe they'll have to let a guy go who they would maybe want to sign. I feel like at this point, the most likely receiver to get a huge extension would be Rashad Bateman. Will this offense ever pay receivers? I don't know. Like, that's a question. The Ravens, they traded away Marquise Brown before it was time to pay him. And obviously some other stuff went into that decision. But still, the Ravens, they were going to have to pay Marquise Brown probably in excess of 20 million, maybe 25 million per season. I personally think that wouldn't have been the smartest investment, regardless of how good Marquise Brown is. I think, again, he is one of the best wide receiver twos in the NFL. I've stayed consistent with that. So the Ravens, age-wise, the future is really bright there, because they have, again, a 25-year-old Lamar Jackson, a 23-year-old J.K. Dobbins, a 27-year-old Gus Edwards. You have 22-year-old Rashad Bateman, all the other guys in the early 20s in the wide receiver room. Not to mention the tight ends, right? Tight ends are important. Mark Andrews only 26. Nick Boyle, a young 29, I would say. You have Charlie Kohler, 23. Isaiah Likely, 22. Even if you want to count Josh Oliver, he's 25. So all guys under 30. The Ravens offense, it is like when you're talking about the age group of the offense and the offense is a very young offense compared to the defense. There are a lot more veterans on the defensive side of the ball. Really, when you're talking about like pure veterans on the offense, Kevin Zeitler is 32. He's played in this league for 11 years. But you have, fullback Patrick Ricard is 28. You have guys like Ben Cleveland, who is 23. If you want to look at the offensive tackle position a little bit, you can look to Ronnie Stanley, who is 28. You have, again, Morgan Moses is another veteran. He's 31, played for 9 years. Jawan James, 30, played 7 years. So some tackle veterans there, but Daniel Falele is 22. You have other guys also there. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum, center. The center position is one that they have some talent as well. Linderbaum just got drafted. I mean, he's only 22 years old. So they have a lot of options. You have a young offensive line in some aspects. Now, Ronnie Stanley's not the youngest player in the world, but if you have Ronnie Stanley, maybe Ben Cleveland shows up, maybe he wins that starting job. Tyree Phillips, also a young guy there. Linderbaum, you're probably looking at a right guard replacement somewhat soon. Also a long-term option at tackle. Potentially could be Falele at right tackle. I'd love that. So all in all, I think the offense, with the extensions in mind, Mark Andrews and Ronnie Stanley, Jackson as well, I think they're set up. Like, they have the talent. Will they be able to retain all of it? I don't know. I mean, so with some of these things, with having so much young talent like we saw with Darius Smith and Matthew Judon and some of their other young talent on defense, they had to let some of it go because they had to pay other guys from their team. So I think overall the future's bright. They have the draft picks to potentially replace those guys. And while you would like to see most of these guys re-signed and locked up to long-term extensions, kind of got 5 years, 4 years, whatever it may be, I think that the Ravens their future on offense is really bright. And I think that all has to do, or not all, but a lot of it has to do with their quarterback, and that is Lamar Jackson. But we'll head into our final break here on the show. When we get back, we'll be diving into the defensive future, talking about how bright that future is. So be sure to stay tuned here. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Thank you. And also be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Be sure to like this video. Be sure to follow us in audio form. Everything I greatly appreciate. And also be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL, where I hosted the Monday show. We can talk a lot about that because I talked about Baker Mayfield. I talked about Justin Houston as well with the host them all across our network. But let's now talk about the defensive side of the ball and the future for it. Because as I talked about, and I kind of teased a bit in the second segment, I think the unit that will be affected the most by the Lamar Jackson extension will be the defensive unit. And some of the money will come off the books. I mean, the Ravens, as of this point, 2023, according to Spotrac, they will have an estimated, in terms of top 51, $32 million in cap space. Now, that is with Lamar Jackson off the books. So he's averaging, or at least the calculated market value for him is $44.1 million right now. So whether you want to add a little bit onto that, take away a little bit from that, the Ravens won't have a ton of cap space to work with once Lamar Jackson does end up signing that extension, or even if they franchise tag him, right? That's another area where I think the Ravens will then have to discuss, well, what are we going to do with some of the veterans? Calais Campbell, who knows if he's even going to come back for a 16th season after this one? But if he does, what's the money there? Will they bring back Marcus Peters? What are they going to do about a potential Patrick Queen extension in a couple of seasons? Or is that a player they want to pay? Or are they going to maybe let him walk and then draft another inside linebacker with one of their draft picks? They have a lot of options at inside linebacker to potentially draft a guy in college, like another first-round guy who could play for another 4 or 5 seasons and not cost maybe a Patrick Queen extension. So I don't know what that situation is going to be like. They have Marlon Humphrey signed to an almost $100 million extension. They signed Marcus Williams to that $70 million deal, so they have that. And yeah, I think that for the defense, we're going to start seeing the transition from older, like, veterans on bigger contracts to pretty minimum sized veteran contracts plus draft picks. Like the Ravens, like part of the reason I think the Ravens ended up taking all 11 draft picks they had, I was shocked at first. I said, well, they're definitely going to have to trade some of those fourth rounders. They had 6 fourth rounders and they took all of them. I think part of the reason is because they know they have a big extension coming on the pipeline, hopefully with Lamar Jackson, and they're going to have to rely on guys on rookie contracts to help win them a title, or hopefully multiple titles. And that's a big part of this whole situation because sometimes veterans want a bit more than the minimum and they just can't, there's not a lot they can do. Rookie contracts are really inexpensive. Like, for how talented players can be on rookie contracts, they are very inexpensive. Now, are you going to hit on every single rookie that you draft? No, it's not realistic. But I think that with the Ravens, we will start to see that trend potentially where, for example, we saw the Ravens trade Ben Bredeson in the 6th for a 4th. Sean Wade, who wasn't working out, he got traded for a 5th, right? There's a lot of different things that go into these decisions. I think, and I'm not saying for certain, but I think part of it is because the Ravens know that with this Jackson extension, there just won't be as much to invest in on the defensive side of the ball. Not saying they don't have talent there still. Like Marlon Humphrey, I think, is here to stay. Adafe Owe looks really promising at outside linebacker. A lot of young defensive tackles too. Justin Metabike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones. Kyle Hamilton's going to, I hope, be in Baltimore for a really long time. And I think also you're looking at other corners like Jalen Armour-Davis. Can he play a role? Pepe Williams, what's he's going to do? Brandon Stevens. I mean, is there an opportunity for him to be able to come in and play maybe slot, maybe some safety? I don't know what the situation is with him. We'll kind of see as training camp begins the preseason, but there are those options as well. So I think the Ravens, again, a ton of young talent. Patrick Queen, I talked about. Dalen Hayes has shown flashes, but I think we will see the Ravens begin to build their defense back through the draft. Not saying that it's all of a sudden going to be this terrible unit or anything if they lose a Marcus Peters or a Calais Campbell or Justin Houston or anything, but they will have to start either signing guys to pretty minimum deals on the free agent market or just drafting those guys, and they have the capital to do that. They haven't exhausted it on a trade. And if they did, they could get maybe a stud player. But again, we've talked about DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, who actually just signed an extension. You have Deebo Samuel. The price you got to pay draft capital wise, the extension amount is going to be, I think that for the Ravens, part of the reason they don't, Eric DeCosta's talked about this, Ozzie Newsom's talked about this, but part of the reason is because you like to have those young guys. And I think, at least in my opinion, what the Ravens are doing is making sure that they have enough retainable young talent on 4-year deals, 5-year deals to throw out there for as many years as their rookie contract has. And then they can either sign them to those team-friendly deals. We've seen that before, right? Patrick Ricard, Chuck Clark, Tavon Young, Nick Boyle. I'm missing a couple others. Patrick McGarry, another one. All these different players who perform at a relatively high level, and the Ravens are able to lock in for 3 years, $16 million, 4 years, $25 million, right? Some of those really good figures. So when you're looking at a potential extension, like I think Adafe Owe will end up commanding a lot more than that. But maybe if Dalen Hayes performs super, super well, maybe if you get nice contributions from Justin Metabike or Broderick Washington, you can sign some of those contracts and you still have your talent at a discounted price that is still a good deal for both sides. It's not like the Ravens are ripping off the player or the player is taking all this money that's undeserved, right? It's a balanced deal that I think is going to be a really good thing for the Ravens in the future to exercise that. Like I think for some of the, like going back to offense, maybe Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, they will be able to sign those contracts, potentially maybe another Nick Boyle extension. I know we've seen the money kind of pushed around a little bit with him. But on the defensive side of the ball, they have the foundation. I think they do. They have foundational pieces. Kyle Hamilton, Adafe Owe, Patrick Queen, Justin Metabike. I mean, they have those players. And looking at ages, because I do want to do a little bit of the ages thing here. Jalen Armour-Davis is 22. Marlon Humphrey is 26. Marcus Peters is 29. So he's, I guess, getting up there, but still, he's under 30. Pepe Williams, 24. Brandon Stevens, 24. So that is an area where I'm pretty confident in cornerback-wise. They can maybe add, like, if they want to add another guy, they definitely could. Like, I think that they could draft a corner in the first round next year, and I think that'd be a completely fine investment. So the corner position is still some young studs. The defensive line is one where they do have a bit of veteran leadership there. Brent Urban is 31. Calais Campbell is 35. Michael Pierce is 29. But you also have Travis Jones, who's 22. Metabike is 24. Broderick Washington is also pretty young. He's 25. So you have, again, options there that I think are really, really good. Then you start talking about the inside linebackers. Patrick Queen is only 22. Malik Harrison is only 24. Josh Bynes is not a long-term option. He's 32. But then you have other potential undrafted guys, such as Kobe McLean, who's 22. Josh Ross, who's 22. So I like that aspect of things. Kristen Welch, 24. Looking at the outside linebackers, Tyus Bowser is 27. Dalen Hayes is 24. Undrafted guy Jeremiah Moon is 23. David Ajabo, 22. Adafe Owe, 23. A top four of Tyus Bowser, David Ajabo, Adafe Owe, and Dalen Hayes, no particular order. I think that's pretty good. And then you can add in like an undrafted guy, maybe another vet, like a Houston type player. I think that is actually rather good. And then looking at the safety position, Kyle Hamilton, 21, Chuck Clark, 27, Marcus Williams, 25. That's your big three. And all of them are under 27. I think that's really good. And I think that when the time comes, maybe the end of this season, the end of next season, we're going to talk about how good that safety group is, that trio is, because it really does have a ton of really, really good players overall. So I'm really excited about the Ravens' future. Obviously, draft picks come into this, salary cap comes into this, and obviously free agent additions as well come into it, because the Ravens aren't going to look the same every single year. They're going to be guys who leave, guys who come in, guys who retire, guys who were traded for. So a lot is unknown right now, but based off the guys they have on their roster, I like what they have. I'm pretty confident in everything that they do in terms of their philosophy. I think that they certainly maybe could add a guy via trade, but you got to take into account all the factors, not just, ooh, this is the on the field fit. You got to look at 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line, 2 years down the line. You got to look down the line. I think the Ravens do a pretty good job at that overall. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into this After Dark episode. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, of course. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here tomorrow.